Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our group project presentation this afternoon. We will be presenting our work on the wild pig management at the Jack and Laura Dangemond Preserve. I'm Benson Truong, one of the presenters and co-data manager for Pig Patrol, and presenting alongside me is Peter Omasta, our project manager. The rest of the team is Shu Han Song, the other co-data manager, and AJ Zikanowski, our outreach coordinator. Today, we are excited to share our work as master students from the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management to the public and to our client, the Nature Conservancy. Before I jump into our main findings and recommendations, I would like to give some background information on the client, some context to our study location, and species of interest. Our client, the Nature Conservancy, or TNC, is one of the largest nonprofit environmental organizations in the United States. The organization has over 1 million members and have protected 125 million acres of land and thousands of miles of rivers. TNC acquired the preserve back in 2017 after receiving a generous donation from ISRI founders Jack and Laura Dangemond. The Dangemond Preserve is our group's project study area and is located about 50 miles northwest of Santa Barbara. The preserve contains 25,000 acres of natural and cultural resources and can be viewed in the figure on the right. The preserve contains many diverse habitats, including coastal oak woodlands, wetlands, and coastal habitats, as well as valuable historic land and artifacts from the Chumash people. TNC's vision on the preserve is for it to serve as a global platform for applied conservation research and education to inspire the next generation of conservation leadership. As students and environmental advocates, our group was excited to work along with TNC to help achieve their conservation and educational goals. Now that we have some context about our client and study location, I will move on to talk about our species of interest, which are pigs. Pigs were first brought to the United States in the 1500s as a food source when early Spanish explorers arrived in North America. Some of these pigs escaped from farms and established the first wild pig populations. Fast forward to today, specifically in California, these feral pigs adapted well to their environments and have few natural predators, which makes wild pigs highly successful in the wild. In fact, the number of counties in California with recorded pig populations has grown from 10 counties in the 1960s to 56 of the 58 counties in 2020. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife has estimated that the total abundance of wild pigs in California is around 133,000 individuals. Now, this information represents the current statewide conditions of wild pigs in California. But what does it mean specifically for TNC as they manage 25,000 acres of coastal habitat in Santa Barbara County, which is one of the wild pig hot zones in the state? Wild pigs have been studied intensely and are documented to have negative impacts on natural resources. Wild pigs are a conservation issue to the Nature Conservancy on the preserve because they can potentially cause severe ecological damages to the land. Specifically, pigs can alter ecosystems and degrade habitats by changing soil compositions via rooting, which is when pigs use their snouts to dig through soils when looking for food. This foraging behavior also invites invasive plant species to establish as native plants are destroyed and pockets of soil open up. Pigs prey on many small animals, including birds, small mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. This is concerning because pigs can potentially threaten some of the existing 50 rare and endangered species on the preserve. Wild pigs also indirectly impact these species by competing for food sources and are also carriers of many diseases that can be transmitted to wildlife, livestock, and humans, which may threaten the current cattle conditions and operations on the preserve. Finally, pigs can damage cultural and historic sites, which is just as important for our client to protect. From these listed threats, it is apparent that wild pigs are detrimental to the preserve. So what are some research questions that we and TNC has come up with? Our first question has to do with the population size of wild pigs on the preserve. 9 years ago, in 2012, the previous owners set up 38 camera trap stations on the land and collected wildlife photos for nearly 2 years. In addition, after acquiring the land in 2017, TNC staff have personally seen wild pig activity and movement throughout the preserve. Although pigs are documented to exist on the preserve in recent years, no studies have been conducted to quantify or measure the population size of these species. Therefore, it is critical to come up with an approximation of how many pigs are at the preserve to see how much activity and potential harm these species are to the land. Our second question deals with how TNC should manage the wild pigs at the preserve, or in other terms, how can TNC utilize their resources to protect their ecological assets at the preserve from wild pigs? Some of these resources include natural land boundaries, pre-existing wild pig predators, fencing, hunting, trapping, and monitoring. This open-ended question allows for our team to creatively brainstorm different management strategies for our client. So how did TNC answer these questions, and what is our ecological and management approach? The two data sets given by TNC were 400,000 wildlife photos and GIS files on the preserve. Our team conducted literature reviews and found and applied a method to process these photos, estimate wild pig abundance, and predict their distribution on the preserve. After finding how many pigs there were and their primary locations, we wanted to know how TNC can cost effectively manage these pigs given our discovered knowledge and the client's resources. We looked at 3 different wild pig management strategies that TNC can utilize. The first strategy is the total eradication and fencing of the preserve, which means that all pigs on the preserve would be removed completely and for the whole preserve to be fenced off against future pig populations. The second strategy is targeted removal, which involves hunting and trapping efforts and monitoring. And lastly, the third strategy is selective fencing of high priority areas in which have been identified by TNC. We use the GIS layers in ArcGIS and R to map out and visualize some of these scenarios. Now I'll finally dive into our main findings. From our data analysis, we estimated that the pig abundance is a little under 200 individuals, which comes out to be a density of 2 pigs per kilometer squared on a preserve. We know that pig damages scale with pig density, so we asked ourselves, is this number a large number, and is it a threat to Dangemond? Compared to other case studies that deal with wild pigs, 2 pigs per kilometer squared is a relatively small density. In addition, research studies have shown that only density values above 2 pigs per kilometer squared would degrade coastal live oak regeneration, which is an important ecological asset for TNC. Therefore, we can say that the abundance and density of wild pigs at the preserve are low and isn't an immediate threat yet. For the location of pigs, we found them to be distributed towards the southern parts of the preserve. This finding can be justified by the abundance of fresh water and food resources found in nearby wetland habitats in the south. The 2 figures show the spatial distribution of wild pigs between 2 6-month time periods. Pig densities tended to cluster on certain parts, mostly the south, and be relatively absent from other parts in the north. Now that we have some context about our population at the preserve, I will pass it on to Peter, who will talk about the major findings for our management strategies.
Thank you, Benson. The first scenario that we will discuss was the total eradication of wild pigs from the preserve. To examine the cost effectiveness of this approach, we compared the estimated cost that TNC, the orange triangle, would be paying with other wild pig eradication case studies. The sample size for this was limited, given that many states do not classify wild pigs as a game species, but rather as a pest, leading to more internal eradication efforts that are not documented. For the studies we do have, only one would have a higher cost per pig removed. 2 studies with a much lower cost, the circles on the graph, did not have fencing but had natural barriers that would prevent migration, which would not be the case for the Dangemond Preserve. Thus, the largest cost for this method would be fencing off the entire preserve boundary to prevent migration back after eradication. Once the fence was established, that is when eradication efforts could begin, and would likely take a year or more based on other studies. The capital costs associated with this scenario were ultimately too high to justify this as an approach, while additional factors related to habitat connectivity, relationships with neighbors, and staff hours for monitoring the fence line were also a concern. The second approach that we examined was a targeted removal of pig populations and increased monitoring. The major takeaway from this was that it would take a large, annual, and intense hunting effort to mitigate pig damages. It is estimated that 70% or more of pigs would need to be removed annually in order to lower the density of pigs. This intensity is due to a high birth rate for wild pigs. A female sow can have 2 litters of around 7 pigs each annually. Additionally, conversations with other land managers have shown that pigs tend to adapt to hunting efforts fairly quickly. For example, hunting at day makes pig efforts more active at night, or hunting in meadows pushes them into more densely forested areas, which can make hunting efforts even more difficult. This increases the marginal cost for removing 1 additional pig. To minimize the costs of annual hunting, increased monitoring of pig populations was explored. A camera trap network, as seen in the image provided by TNC on the right, will allow for a population estimate to occur more frequently and determine if a selective hunting exhibition needs to come in. It will allow for seeing where pig movements are on the preserve for a relatively low cost compared to the other 2 options. For the third option of selective fencing, we spoke with TNC about what they believed would be priority areas for fencing and examined the spatial distribution of pigs. The fencing alone does not significantly help with lowering pig density, population, or abundance, but it can protect high priority conservation areas from further damage. Fencing off critical pig habitat, like watering holes, could have a negative effect on pig populations, but also cattle and other native species. So we only looked at protective fencing around these priority conservation areas. The image shows 4 areas that were identified: an oak woodland area in green, also known as Army Camp, a coastal area that is separated by a railroad track in orange, and 2 smaller coastal dune areas in white. Larger areas tend to be more cost effective when looking at this as an area protected per dollar cost. For example, a fence along the entire railroad would be the most expensive installation, but would protect the most area, making it the most cost effective for $1 per area protected. For what TNC has already completed, which is not pictured, since those areas are in multiple locations, the cost is higher. There were a few limitations for this study. For the data that we analyzed, it was collected from 2013 to 2014, when the state of California was in a drought. Droughts are well documented to lower pig populations as there is less food available for foraging. Additionally, an assumption that we made in the model for estimating the population was that the preserve was a closed boundary, which it is not. We did not have data tracking pig movements from the prior study, which could have provided immigration and emigration numbers. By not accounting for immigration and emigration, it allowed for a more simple population estimate, but it is not indicative of the real scenario on the preserve. A final limitation for the population analysis was using a maximum number of pig counts per episode instead of tracking individuals. This is because it is nearly impossible to differentiate between individual pigs in a series of photos based on coloration. All that said, it is possible that current pig populations are higher than the 2 pigs per kilometer squared or 200 pigs total, which may influence some decisions like hunting. A final assumption we made was about the cost of fencing. Fencing costs can be highly variable depending on the terrain that it goes through. We estimated an average cost of $8.95 per foot, but this cost can increase depending on the habitat that the fence goes through. We assumed a homogeneous landscape for simplicity purposes, which may have depressed the actual number. Our recommendations for TNC in managing the wild pigs on the Dangemond Preserve are to first, increase the monitoring network on the preserve by installing an additional 30 camera traps and deploying a VHF radio tracking system. This will allow for monitoring pig and other animal populations while also seeing where pigs are moving throughout the preserve. Second, installing fencing to protect the Army Camp Oak Woodland area would help TNC meet conservation goals established by the California Coastal Commission and prevent further pig damage in this area. Additional fencing should be installed at either the 2 coastal dune areas individually or along the railroad, which would help mitigate coastal damage that is caused by pigs. Third, in years with high pig density, allowing limited hunting can mitigate damages if the density goes significantly above the 2 pigs per kilometer squared number. Finally, and maybe most importantly, TNC needs to work with nearby landowners in Hollister Ranch and Vandenberg Air Force Base to establish a more regional approach to mitigating this issue. One entity acting alone would be less effective than if all 3 were to partner together to deal with this issue. We would like to thank numerous people that helped us with this project. The James S. Bauer Foundation that provided us with funding, the Nature Conservancy staff, Mark Reynolds, Kelly Easterday, Moses Ketkowski for their feedback, guidance, and assistance with this project, our external advisors, Dr. Chris Costello and Dr. Bruce Kendall of the Bren School, and Craig Huff and Colby Boggs of Rincon Consultants. We would like to acknowledge the dozens of conservation management professionals that spoke with our team about the project throughout the year. We would also like to thank our friends, family, pets, and other classmates for supporting us throughout this journey. Additionally, a big thank you to the Bren staff, faculty, and administration for all the work that they have done to facilitate this project with the current ongoing pandemic. Finally, and most importantly, an enormous thank you to Dr. Kelly Kaler, our faculty advisor, for his guidance, expertise, humility, and insights on this project. So thank you all for attending. I will now pass this to AJ to facilitate questions.